Good evening. I'm here to talk about miracles. More specifically, I'm here to talk about a miracle that occurred in my life that has changed me forever. I hope you walk away today not only believing that miracles can occur, but actually expecting them to occur in your life and impact you in a profound way going forward. So first, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my grandfather. My grandfather was the type of grandfather that you wanted to have. Not only was he smart, kind, and hardworking, but every time he saw me, he gave me $1. In fact, every time he saw a child, he gave them $1. And that was his signature move. I could remember him giving dollar bills to all my cousins and friends throughout my childhood. Sadly, 17 years ago, my grandfather passed away from a heart attack. While my family mourned, no one had a more difficult time getting over his passing than my mother. While she was a very spiritual person, she had trouble reconciling why such an amazing person had been taken from her life so suddenly. On a cold day, a few years after my grandfather's death, I was with my mom in a rose garden. Although I was very young, I could remember her being especially sad as I walked with her through the rose garden. Then, as we walked, my mom stumbled upon something on the ground. And when she reached down and picked it up and brushed off the dirt, she realized it was a dollar bill. And in that moment, she told me that she felt her dad's presence and somehow she knew everything would be okay. And from that moment on, actually, she no longer mourned his passing and grieved so heavily, and everything got a lot easier for her. She then took the dollar, wrote Dad's dollar, Jane's dollar, found 4/7/2005, and put it on her desk. Over the following few years, I would see the dollar in my mom's desk, and I would ask about the story, as I knew it was a special story for her and that she enjoyed telling it. Before I go any further, I have to tell you a little bit about my mother. She was the middle child of 11 and followed in her father's footsteps and went to Brooklyn Law School. She was a great lawyer, but even better mother. Our childhood was filled with days such as Kids' Days. And if you haven't heard of Kids' Days, those are days in which you could miss school, go shopping, and play sports, with the only caveat that you couldn't tell your friends, teachers, and most importantly, you couldn't tell Dad. My brother Jared and I were very happy kids, but we were actually terrible students. When Jared was in 4th grade, my mom was notified that he was well behind his peers in terms of reading ability, and that I, a year and a half younger, was also in the bottom 10% of my class in terms of reading ability. As 4th and 2nd graders, Jared and I were essentially illiterate. After Jared and I went through extensive testing, we were both diagnosed with severe dyslexia, and several teachers tried to manage my mother's expectations and said she would be lucky if we got through high school. From that moment on, my mom made it her mission to teach us how to read. She stopped working as a lawyer and got her master's in learning disabilities at a nearby college so she could teach us before and after school as well as on the weekends. We moved from a house that we just built and was designed by my mom and was essentially her dream house to another town that had the state's best special education program. She also met with all my teachers to make sure they were up to date with the most progressive dyslexic teaching styles, many of which came from the Yale Center for Dyslexia, only a few blocks away from here. So in our house, the name Yale is revered. It's God, Yale, and maybe the New York Rangers after that. So flashcards littered our house, and Jared and I were constantly bribed with new sports equipment if we did a certain amount of reading. In fact, reading instruction permeated all facets of life in the house. As I can remember my mom and my dad getting a huge fight, and they rarely fought, so I was pretty concerned. And when I asked my mom what was going on, she told me that it was because Dad stopped using adverbs. So that's how much reading instruction impacted our lives holistically. So slowly but surely, my brother and I made progress, and by high school, we were nearly at grade level reading. My brother committed to play lacrosse at Villanova during his junior year in high school, and our family was ecstatic. 2 years later, when I was a junior in high school, I committed to Lafayette College, and my mom exuded happiness for weeks. A few months later, on my first day of my senior year of high school, the official letter of my acceptance came in the mail. On that same day, my mom, who had recently went to the doctor because of stomach pain, received notification that she had late-stage ovarian cancer and that the odds of her surviving more than a year were very slim. Although I had already committed to Lafayette for lacrosse and that the official acceptance was more of a formality, she still said it was one of the greatest days of her life, and she insisted on going out to celebrate. So on that day, when she found out that she had a deadly disease in her body, and I merely got a letter in the mail confirming what I already knew, we celebrated. From that moment on, I viewed my mom's battle as our battle. With all the kids out of the house and my dad working often late, I thought it was just me and her in the trenches. She opted to try an unproven and risky surgery and chemotherapy combination. She slept 22 hours a day for months, and as she started losing her hair from the chemotherapy, we got matching buzz cuts. She made me promise never to get another buzz cut again, but I think she enjoyed it at the time. So amazingly, the surgery and the chemotherapy was successful in that the treatments reduced the cancer in her abdomen. She continued to take lower dose chemotherapy and had to have several surgeries over the next several years, but her amazing attitude allowed us to think that everything was back to normal. In fact, 2 years after her initial diagnosis, me and her went down to Juarez, Mexico for a few weeks to help build houses. And she got in trouble with the U.S. Border Police for sneaking the nuns into the U.S. to get manicures and pedicures. So around 2.5 years ago, my mom started to have a lot of complications. Her treatments were no longer effective, and although she traveled to the world's most prominent cancer centers, no one had a solution. And actually, many were amazed that she had survived this long. A few months after this, several of her organs began to shut down, and she was put into a medically induced coma. She was checked into the ICU, and her chances for survival were very slim. While she was in the ICU, I got an email saying that I was given an interview at the Yale School of Management. I was ecstatic, and I was also shocked about how quickly I got a response because I only applied 10 days prior. And I thought it would take much longer for them to process my application. 3 days later, my mom came out of her coma, and I was able to tell her that I got an interview at Yale. She was the happiest that I've ever seen her, and the doctors, and she kept on telling the doctors that her son was going to Yale. I told her it was just an interview, but perhaps she knew more than me. Sadly, a few days later, her body failed again, and she could not recover, and she subsequently passed away. Her passing was a huge blow for our family, as she was by far our leader and the best person we have ever met. To fast forward a few months, and after I started enrolling at Yale, several days before my brother's birthday last year, I called him to see how he would be celebrating it. I figured that I would join whatever plans he had, considering he worked as a doctor only a few towns away. So to my surprise, he told me that he wanted to skip his birthday because it would be too sad. It was our family's first major event since my mom's passing, and I knew this was a huge test for our family. So I told him that there would be no way we were going to skip his birthday. And if he wanted to cry all night, we could hang out and cry all night, but we weren't skipping his birthday. So he reluctantly agreed, and a few days later, on a cold, rainy night in Derby, Connecticut, I met him, my dad, and his girlfriend in a rundown restaurant near his work for what I thought would be one of the saddest nights of my life. Not to add too much levity to the situation, but the dinner was actually sadder than I initially projected. Along with the tears, we misordered the food, ended up with too many appetizers, and the restaurant was out of dessert. When we left the restaurant, we were all missing Mom more than ever. As we left the parking garage, my brother's girlfriend paid the $3 nightly parking charge with a $5 bill. When she looked at the $2 bills of change, she paused and told Chris that one of the dollars had my mom's name on it, Jane. He took the dollar and realized that it was the same dollar that my mom found in the rose garden and kept in the desk. Somehow, some way, someone must have mistakenly taken the dollar bill out of her desk in New Jersey, spent it, and put it back into the circulation, and now it found us in a small, rundown parking garage in Derby, Connecticut. In the same way that my mom felt my grandfather's presence, we all felt that my mom was with us that night and was watching over us. I always knew my mom was with me, but it was incredible to have that affirmation. From that moment on, everything got a lot easier for me and my family. So I believe that this was a miracle, but I also believe that there were many miracles that occurred along the way. Whether it was having a mother that was willing to give up everything to make sure her dyslexic kids learned how to read, having a doctor propose a risky alternative to accepting a less than 1 year survival prognosis 11 years ago, or finding out from Yale that I received an interview only 10 days after I submitted an application, so that it was the last meaningful thing I was able to tell my mom before she passed away. So to conclude, I believe miracles occur all around us, and that each and every one of us in this room has experienced thousands of miraculous events. The biggest miracles occur when we least expect them to, and also occur when we're pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zone. So going forward, I hope we all extend ourselves as much as possible. Help that friend in need. Go out and celebrate someone's birthday when they're sad, or if they're not sad, even though we're all very busy. Because if we don't, we might miss that dollar that someone sent to us.